Hello, everybody. Welcome to the end of day one, our little wrap up session. It's kind of we're going to be kind of looking through what we covered today a little bit, some resources we wanted to point you to still, and kind of talk about some of the questions that came up in Discord and kind of elaborate on them. I think most of them have been answered, but a lot of them are good questions that we wanted to kind of highlight. So I'm joined by Meredith, Pilot, and Amanda. Thank you. And one thing that I wanted to mention right off the bat that I realized that probably should have done maybe in the intro session, but now as good a time as any, is mention that we do have our support portal. And actually, I realized I'm signed in here. Let me sign out so you can see the same thing. But our support portal, our knowledge base, that's at support.reclaimhosting.com, and I'll throw it in Discord. But this is, I didn't make that a link somehow. Awesome. This is a resource that you should bookmark. There's a lot of stuff here. We have quite a bit of documentation, both on things like even like down to WordPress specific things or like Omeka specific things. But there's an entire category for domain of one's own that is well worth checking out. We've linked to some of these things today already, so you may notice this, but and I know Amanda linked to the WHMCS section actually inside of here, which is full of good stuff. But there's also quite a bit on cPanel and sort of other like case studies on different applications. Like we talk a lot about WordPress, but there's Grav and Omeka and Scalar and all kinds of other good stuff that you can use. The virtual tour of domain of one's own is a pretty good one too. This is kind of something like the beginning of our day session we had where we went through WordPress, WHMCS, and WHM. So this is always available to you. It's something like that. We don't go into quite the same level of depth on everything, but especially if you want to get someone up to speed on your team, this is where I would send them first if they're going to be administering domain of one's own. There's all kinds of other stuff in here too about like, what exactly do we provide for you from Reclaim and what are you expected to do and things like that. Yeah, all kinds of good stuff. Account cleanup is a whole topic that one's tomorrow, right? On long-term management.
Me and Meredith tomorrow morning, I think.
Yeah, so that this will be super relevant there. Analytics and reporting, some of that we'll actually talk a little bit about at the very end of the day tomorrow, and probably throughout the day too. It comes up quite a bit. So I just wanted to point that out as this whole domain of one's own category is super helpful, and I would definitely check it out. Besides that, so we had a few questions. Excuse me, I'm like just getting over a cold, so I'm still coughing a little bit. Maybe I muted that in time. Maybe you didn't hear the cough, but maybe you saw it. Anyway,
no.
I'm getting good with the cough button. So, but couple questions I wanted to sort of pull out. First one I wanted to mention is Shannon brought up just before this actually in the last session. When should, if you have multiple sites you're talking about, when should it be in its own cPanel versus when should you have one cPanel that has multiple sites in it? And there is some good discussion in there. Meredith was talking with Shannon about it, and Shannon had sort of her own criteria, which is great. And so I think, but ultimately it's very situational, which is why I wanted to bring it up. So I wanted to actually highlight that what Shannon's criteria was here, and I'm scrolling back really quick, which was just to say that, hey, if it's a project that might move around between owners, sometimes it's easier for it to live in its own cPanel so they can just be moved in WHMCS between people. And if it's a faculty member doing like multiple projects, then they're all owning those projects. It maybe makes sense for them to live in their cPanel. And I would agree with that in general. I think that's kind of how I think of it too. But there are sort of some other situations and factors to think about. So I kind of wanted to talk about that. Meredith, I think you probably had some things to say about this specifically. So.
Yeah. I did also kind of put in the chat just explaining more about what like specific use cases you can use. So like if the faculty member wants to use like different URLs, like distinct URLs for each project, I definitely recommend the add-on domain side of things, but also subdomains off of the main URL of the account for the user's account, not the main project URL. That way, the organization can live in the account without like getting into like different folders in the same public HTML folder and all of that good stuff. So having the subdomain is really helpful to like create that distinction between projects. Um, and add-on domains also helps like if you're like running a food bank on campus or something and you want to like the faculty member is the person holding on to the account, like that's a good example. Any like student clubs or um, yeah, any student clubs would be really good as a
Organizations
separate
in
one.
general. Yeah.
Yeah, it would be a separate one just because it like the like club president or something like that like leaves the university or institution, that is easy enough to switch ownership in WHMCS versus breaking the site out of the account and then creating a new WHMCS profile. So anything where like turnover might happen quicker than you think, it makes sense to break out into its own.
And there's a lot of ways to handle that too, right? Like one of the things, some of it is sort of policy based and like organizationally what makes sense for you. I know when I was at SNC, the way we dealt with student organizations is they weren't allowed a cPanel account. However, they were allowed to, sorry, they were allowed a cPanel account, but it had to live under the faculty member who was their advisor, is how we handled it. And it was kind of served multiple things so that we didn't have to switch things all the time. The downside of that, though, is it was trickier to get students access to the cPanel. I mean, there were ways, right? You can use some of the tools for having multiple people log into one cPanel, and that's what we would do. But honestly, most of the time for what they were using them for, just having them log into WordPress was kind of all they needed. So it was situational, but that worked really well for me because it was easier for me to go, yeah, I don't need to go look up who the advisor is. It's in their cPanel. Like I can tell, you know. But that's not going to work for everyone. And if you have a student org that's really doing a lot, having multiple sites and things, then that might not be an ideal solution. So it's good to have
Yeah,
that flexibility.
Lee from Georgetown just mentioned admin accounts for their IT unit for like departmental cPanel accounts and like long-term projects. So that's also a good use case too, for
Sweet.
sure.
Um, Another one I wanted to bring up. Mike from Arizona asked about WHM if it has multiple users besides root. And that's another question that I answered in Discord, but I wanted to pick out because it's a good one to point out. We did say something along the lines, but I think it's worth highlighting. That WHM password you get, that is the user account and password that you can use for logging into WHM. Unlike WHMCS, where you can create individual admin accounts and turn them off when people leave, that WHM password is shared, which is why we would encourage you to be really cautious with who has access to that. And when someone leaves, that's time to change it. You let us know at Reclaim, we'll reset it for you and send you a new password. But yeah, that is very important. We do have that count locked down in terms of what it can do, like from like a Linux perspective, like SSH and SFTP and services like that are not available on it. But it is a shared account. And we are working on a couple security improvements really to see even obfuscate that further. But the way WHM works is you have to have an account that owns all of the cPanels under it. So ultimately, it'll always be one password. So that's one thing that the WHM access is good. There's some stuff you can do in there. But for the most part, most of the things you need to do in there, we can do for you at Reclaim as well. So maybe have someone have access to that in your organization if they really need it. And if you don't share that password broadly. Or at least, we'll have to reset it pretty often if people are coming and going and who have access to it. There is a session tomorrow that Amanda and I do on site templating and Installatron in general that does kind of talk about some things in WHM that you can do, but also point out that it's usually not things you're doing every week or every month. So having that locking down access to that is a good idea. Any other things you all wanted to bring up? Questions, stuff you wanted to highlight?
I'm just looking at the chat right now. It looks like Lee and Jacob are having a conversation about admin accounts from the IT department, and just different ways of managing ownership that might be useful.
Yeah, a lot of that's going to be very dependent on sort of how your school's single sign-on system operates.
Yeah.
A lot of the time, it's very common for there to be intentionally no way for there to be like generic accounts that are shared that use single sign-on. They want those to be sort of in a different thing because of very good IT reasons, typically, like to do with identity management and things like that. So sometimes that's possible using different methods. Sometimes it's not. I also point out too, it is possible to share the direct cPanel login. It's not something we talk about, but you can log directly into a cPanel with the password that's the username and password in WHMCS that we normally say, yeah, don't look at it, don't worry about it. And you can do that, but using the methods we outlined today, I think are much better from a security perspective, because you don't have to be sharing a password and have it shared amongst 3 different people. And again, it's the same kind of issue, right? So that's why we do like the things that let you have multiple people log into the same account, even though it's a little bit of a setup initially.
And if you are going to share passwords, I definitely recommend using onetimesecret.com as a way to share secure links to folks. The link is temporary, so once it's clicked, no one else can access the link. It's like a burn after reading note sort of deal. So definitely use One Time Secret. We use it all the time at Reclaim, passing stuff back and forth and through tickets and stuff like that. So super helpful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, with that, we're almost out of time. Anything else before we sign off and see everyone tomorrow?
I think just thank you guys for coming today. It's been really, really fun.
Yeah.
I've had a great time.
Yeah, it's been great seeing people in the Discord, and again, feel free to put questions in there, thoughts. We're always happy to answer stuff, and I like when people can ask these questions in some semi-public space, because other people have the same questions, right? So
100%.
It's always good.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. And we'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
See y'all.
Bye.